Julian stood under the spotlight, clutching his champagne flute like a scepter while the elite of New York hung on his every arrogant word. He thought I was just the decorative wife he planned to discard after tonight, a silent accessory to his billion-dollar empire. But as he laughed at my expense, my fingers tightened around the clutch holding the evidence of his $15 million fraud. He expected a toast, but I was about to serve him a prison sentence. My name is Elena Rossi, and at 34 years old, I had perfected the art of disappearing while standing in plain sight. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Heights in New York was a suffocating cage of gold leaf and velvet. We were here to celebrate 10 years of Thorne Enterprises, a decade of my husband's supposed genius, but the air felt heavy, thick with the scent of expensive lilies and deceit. Beside me stood Julian, in his bespoke Italian tuxedo. He looked every inch the conqueror. He was tall, his hair swept back in a wave of dark silk, and he exuded the kind of power that made lesser men shrink. He kept a hand on the small of my back, but there was no warmth in his touch. It was a possessive clamp, a physical reminder that I was his property. To him, I was no different from the diamond choker around my neck, a shiny object to be displayed to the shareholders and then put back in a box when the night was over. I watched his eyes dart over the crowd, ignoring the investors who were trying to shake his hand. He was looking for her, Sophia Vance. She stood near the ice sculpture, wearing a crimson dress that screamed for attention. The newly appointed chief financial officer was sharp, ambitious, and currently sharing a secret smirking glance with my husband that made my stomach turn. It was a look of shared conspiracy, the kind of look that said they knew something the rest of the room did not. "Mrs. Thorne," a heavy-set man named Mr. Henderson said, leaning in with a glass of scotch in his hand. I must say, I was impressed by the charitable outreach program the company launched last quarter. Was that your initiative? Actually, yes, I started, feeling a rare spark of engagement. I analyzed the demographics of the Lower East Side and realized that Julian's grip on my waist tightened to the point of pain. He cut me off instantly, his voice booming with a fake, jovial laughter that echoed off the high ceilings. "Oh, Henderson, don't bore her with the details," Julian interrupted, flashing a condescending grin at the investor. "Elena thinks demographics are a type of skin cream. You know how it is. She is wonderful at spending the profits, but let's not pretend she understands how we make them." Mr. Henderson chuckled nervously, looking between us. "Right. Of course, Julian. A trophy needs polishing, not burdening with heavy lifting. I forced my lips into a stiff, practiced smile, though I could taste the metallic tang of rage in the back of my throat. They laughed at me. They saw a quiet, stupid woman. They had no idea that 8 years ago, Julian was sobbing on the floor of our studio apartment, facing bankruptcy and prison for tax evasion. They did not know that it was my grandmother's inheritance that bailed him out, or that it was my financial models that built his first million. He had buried that truth under a mountain of arrogance. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, and the orchestra swelled to a crescendo. The master of ceremonies announced Julian's name. Julian adjusted his cufflinks, preening like a peacock. He leaned down close to my ear, to the cameras flashing nearby. It looked like a romantic whisper between a power couple. "Don't do anything to embarrass me, Elena," he hissed, his voice dropping to a cold, flat register that froze my blood. "Just stand there and smile. It is the only thing you are good at." He pulled away, winking at me as if we shared a delightful joke, and strode toward the stage. My fingers dug into the leather of my clutch purse. It was small, barely large enough for a phone, but I did not have a phone in there. I did not have lipstick or a compact mirror. My hand closed around the cold metal of a USB drive. It contained gigabytes of encrypted data, forensic accounting records, and chat logs that I had spent months compiling. The room erupted in applause. The spotlight swung violently away from me, leaving me in the cold shadows of the wings while it bathed Julian in a halo of white light. He walked up the steps to the podium, soaking in the adoration, the king of his own delusional world. I took a deep, steadying breath. In the darkness, the smile slid off my face. My shoulders, usually rounded in submission, squared back. The terrified wife was gone. I watched him approach the microphone, and my eyes went cold. He thought he was walking toward his coronation, but I knew better. I was watching a dead man walking. "You are being hysterical, Elena," Julian had told me 3 months ago when I asked about the late nights. "It is pathetic, really. How insecure you have become." That memory stung, but it was the older memories that cut the deepest. 8 years ago, Julian was not a titan of industry. He was a desperate broker drowning in $60,000 of credit card debt, sweating through cheap polyester suits. I was the one with the future. I was a senior data analyst with a trajectory straight to the C-suite, but I looked at his frantic energy and mistook it for potential. I traded my corner office for a kitchen table, balancing his chaotic ledgers while he slept. I built the algorithm that predicted the housing market shift. I wrote the strategy, but as the bank accounts swelled from $0 to $10 million, Julian's memory conveniently faded. He started believing his own press releases. My late-night strategy sessions became his intuition. My sacrifices became his burden. Then came Sophia Vance. She walked into the office 6 months ago, not just as a CFO, but as a ghost from his college days. She was everything I was not: loud, aggressive, and morally flexible. The shift in Julian was subtle at first, then glaring. The passcode to his phone, which had been his birthday for 7 years, suddenly changed. Emergency board meetings began happening every weekend in the Hamptons. When I confronted him, he did not just deny it. He dismantled me. "God, you are suffocating me," he had shouted one evening, throwing his scotch glass against the wall. "I work 18 hours a day to give you this life, and you accuse me you are sick, Elena. Maybe you need to see a doctor." I almost believed him. I almost checked myself into a clinic, but then came the Tuesday afternoon that changed everything. I was in the hallway outside his home office, holding a tray of coffee I had brewed for him. The door was ajar. "She is a millstone around my neck. Sophia!" Julian's voice drifted out, clear and cruel. I know. Just wait until the company goes public next month. Once the IPO hits and the stock value triples, I will file for divorce. I will give her the house. She is too stupid to ask for shares." I did not drop the tray. I did not scream. I stood frozen, the ceramic cups rattling ever so slightly against the wood. In that moment, the weeping wife died, and the data analyst woke up. I did not confront him. I retreated to the kitchen, poured the coffee down the sink, and went to work. My tears dried up and were replaced by cold, hard logic. Over the next few weeks, I stopped asking questions. I became the good wife he wanted while I traced every digital footprint he left behind. I discovered that my name had been quietly removed from our joint investment accounts. I found transfers of $200,000, then $500,000, moving into shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, companies that listed Sophia Vance as the beneficiary. Back in the present, the applause died down as Julian adjusted the microphone. I looked across the room at Sophia. She was raising a glass of vintage champagne to her lips, her eyes locked on Julian with a predatory gleam. She was smiling the smile of a woman who thought she had already won the war. She thought she was about to become the new Mrs. Thorne, queen of a billion-dollar empire. She had no idea that the woman she dismissed as a millstone had already mapped out every cent of their stolen fortune. Julian cleared his throat to speak, and I watched Sophia's smile widen. I gripped my purse tighter. "Enjoy the champagne, Sophia. It is the last expensive thing you will ever taste." For the past 3 months, while Julian believed I was busy planning menus or getting facials, I was actually orchestrating his downfall. I hired Marcus, a former FBI agent turned private investigator who specialized in white-collar crime. He handled the physical surveillance, snapping photos of Julian and Sophia entering boutique hotels at 2 in the afternoon on Tuesdays. But the real evidence, the smoking gun that would bury him, required access that only a wife could get. It happened on a rainy Thursday night. Julian stumbled through the front door, reeking of expensive scotch and another woman's perfume. He collapsed onto the living room sofa, his laptop bag sliding from his grip. Don't touch my things," he slurred, waving a hand dismissively before passing out. I waited 10 minutes until his breathing turned into a heavy, rhythmic snore. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I took his laptop, guessed his new password, Sophia's birthday. How cliché, and installed a military-grade keylogger. It was a piece of software that would record every keystroke, every password, and every deleted email, sending it all directly to a secure server I had set up. Over the next few weeks, the data flooded in. I spent my nights analyzing the logs, and what I found was worse than simple adultery. Julian and Sophia were not just sleeping together. They were artificially inflating Thorn Enterprises' revenue to boost the stock price before the initial public offering. I matched credit card receipts to calendar entries. There were invoices for client retention that were actually receipts for a $40,000 diamond bracelet from Cartier. There were consulting fees of $10,000 a night for hotel suites in Paris where no business was conducted. They were bleeding the company dry and hiding the expenses in the marketing budget. Then I found the email that turned my sadness into cold, hard resolve. It was a thread between Julian and his personal lawyer. "We need to trigger the morality clause in the prenup against her," Julian had written. "If we can plant evidence that she is unstable or cheating, I can kick her out with nothing. I need her gone before the IPO launches." I did not cry. I did not throw the laptop. Instead, I copied every file to 3 separate encrypted hard drives. I sent a cloud backup to my friend Sarah, a ruthless divorce attorney who had been waiting for this call for years. Julian thought he was dealing with a scorned woman, but he was dealing with a forensic analyst who knew his books better than he did. The final nail in his coffin was a transaction I found hidden deep in a subfolder labeled Charity. Oh, it was a transfer of $500,000 to a non-profit organization that did not exist. I traced the routing number. It led directly to the personal account of the city planning commissioner. It was a bribe to rezone a worthless piece of swampland into prime commercial real estate. That was not just fraud. That was a federal crime. 2 days before the gala, Julian made his move. We were in the kitchen, and he slid a thick stack of documents across the marble island toward me. "I need you to sign these. Elena," he said, tapping the paper with his pen. "It is just some tax restructuring for the house. Standard procedure." I looked down. It was not tax paperwork. Buried in the legalese was a clause stating I was voluntarily waiving my rights to any future assets of Thorn Enterprises in exchange for a token payment. He was trying to rob me blind before the ink was even dry. I picked up the pen, letting my hand tremble slightly. I looked up at him, widening my eyes in feigned confusion. "Julian, the print is so small," I said, my voice soft and airy. I think I left my reading glasses upstairs. I can't sign what I can't see." He sighed, an exaggerated sound of annoyance. "For God's sake, Elena, it is just a signature. Do you trust me or not?" "Of course I trust you," I lied, setting the pen down. "But you know how my eyes get. I will find my glasses and sign it first thing in the morning. I promise." He snatched the papers back, glaring at me. "Fine, but do not forget, this is important for our future." "Our future?" I repeated, fighting the urge to laugh. "Right." He stormed out of the room, leaving the papers on the counter. He was so arrogant, so sure of his intellectual superiority, that he never suspected I had already read every word, scanned the document, and sent it to the FBI as proof of his intent to defraud. He thought I was just a forgetful housewife. He had no idea I was the one holding the match. The applause washed over the ballroom as Julian took command of the podium. His voice was rich and baritone, projected through the high-end sound system with a practiced cadence that made every lie sound like a gospel truth. 10 years ago, I had nothing but a vision, Julian bellowed, gripping the sides of the lectern with white-knuckled intensity. I built this empire from the ground up, brick by brick, through sleepless nights and sheer, unyielding will. It required sacrifice. It required a mind that refuses to accept failure. I sat at the round table near the front, my hands folded perfectly in my lap. He was rewriting history in real time. There was no mention of the team of analysts who crunched the numbers until dawn. There was certainly no mention of the wife who had leveraged her inheritance to keep the lights on during year 2. In Julian's version of the story, he was a solitary god creating a universe out of dust. But a visionary cannot walk alone, Julian continued, his eyes sliding past me to the woman standing in the wings. I would like to invite up a woman who has been instrumental in our recent explosion of growth, the heart and soul of Thorne Enterprises, our brilliant CFO, Sophia Vance. The room erupted again. Sophia glided onto the stage, her red dress trailing behind her like a pool of blood. She took her place beside him, and for a moment, they posed like the power couple they believed themselves to be. The energy in the room shifted. I could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes pressing against my back. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and cruel amusement. They knew. In their world, the wife was always the last to know, and the first to be replaced. Julian should have stopped there. He had his applause, his mistress, and his ego stroke. But arrogance is a hungry beast, and it is never satisfied. He looked down at me, his eyes glittering with a malicious idea. He decided to go off script. And, of course, Julian said, his tone shifting to a mockingly indulgent drawl, I must thank my lovely wife, Elena. The spotlight swung back to me, blinding and harsh. Elena has handled the most difficult job of all. Julian chuckled into the microphone, leaning casually against the podium. She specializes in spending my money and keeping the house warm while the adults are actually working. A ripple of laughter tore through the room. It was nervous at first, then louder as the sycophants realized it was safe to mock me. I saw Mr. Henderson guffaw, spilling a bit of his wine. Sophia covered her mouth with a manicured hand, but her eyes were crinkled in delight. She looked at me with a direct, challenging stare that said, You are nothing. I did not flinch. I did not look down. I kept my gaze fixed on Julian's face. He was not done. The laughter had intoxicated him. In fact, Julian added, leaning closer to the mic as if sharing a secret with the room, I would bet my stock options that Elena does not even know what Thorne Enterprises actually sells. Do you? Honey, is it shoes? Is it handbags? The room roared. It was a public execution of my dignity. He was stripping me bare, reducing me to a brainless consumer, a parasite attached to his greatness. That moment was the final severance, the last thread of loyalty, the faint memory of the man I once loved, snapped like a dry twig. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was cold and sharp, like the blade of a knife. Oh, Julian, I whispered to myself, the sound lost in the cacophony of laughter. I did not hang my head in shame as he expected. I did not run for the exit in tears. Instead, I slowly pushed my chair back. The metal legs scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that cut through the nearest laughter. I stood up. I smoothed the silk of my midnight blue gown, ensuring every pleat was perfect. I lifted my chin, squaring my shoulders. The laughter in the immediate vicinity faltered as people noticed my expression. There was no fear in my eyes. There was no embarrassment. There was only the terrifying, blank serenity of an executioner adjusting the rope. I took my first step toward the stairs leading to the stage. The sound of my heels striking the wooden steps was the only noise in the room. Click, clack, click. The rhythm was deliberate, steady, and terrifyingly calm against the backdrop of 300 people holding their breath. The laughter had died instantly, strangled by the sheer audacity of my approach. I ascended the stage not as a wife coming to stand by her husband, but as a judge ascending the bench. Julian's smirk faltered, then vanished entirely. As I reached his side, the heat radiating from him was palpable. He leaned in, his jaw clenched so tight I could see a vein throbbing in his temple. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed through his teeth, his voice low enough that the microphone did not pick it up, but venomous enough to burn. "Get down immediately. You are humiliating yourself." I did not look at him. I looked at the microphone in his hand. With a gentle but firm grip, I curled my fingers around the device and pulled. He was so stunned by my defiance that he let go. I turned to the crowd. The blinding stage lights washed out their faces, turning the audience into a sea of darkness. But I knew they were watching. I turned my head slightly to look at Julian, and for the first time in 8 years, I let the mask fall completely. I smiled. It was not the submissive smile of a trophy wife. It was the sharp, baring-teeth smile of a wolf that had cornered a rabbit. "You are right, Julian," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, clear and steady. "I do not know business the way you do." I paused for a beat, letting the silence stretch until it was almost painful. "Because your version of business," I continued, my voice hardening into steel, "involves embezzling $15 million from the employee pension fund and laundering it through shell companies in the Cayman Islands." A collective gasp tore through the room. It was a physical sound, like the air being sucked out of the ballroom. Julian's face went from angry to ashen in a split second. He lunged for me, his hands reaching out to snatch the microphone back. "Give me that," he shouted, forgetting to whisper. I took a smooth step back, predicting his move perfectly. I looked up toward the control booth at the back of the room and gave a sharp, imperceptible nod. The audio technician, a man whose student loans I had paid off anonymously 2 weeks ago, hit the enter key. Behind us, the massive LED screen that had been displaying the golden logo of Thorne Enterprises flickered and went black. A second later, it illuminated with high-definition clarity. It was not a presentation slide. It was a mosaic of screenshots, bank statements, and chat logs. "What is this?" someone in the front row shouted. "It is the truth," I answered into the mic. On the screen, magnified for everyone to see, was a text conversation between Julian T. and Sophia V., dated 3 months ago. "We need to move another $200,000 before the audit on Friday." The message from Julian read, "Don't worry, baby." Sophia's reply read below it, "I hid it under vendor expenses. The idiot auditors won't look twice. We can use it for the Maldives trip." Right next to the texts was a bank transfer receipt showing exactly $200,000 moving from the company operating account to a shell corporation named Blue Horizon Holdings. Sophia stood frozen near the edge of the stage. The blood had drained from her face so completely that her crimson dress looked like a wound against her pale skin. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. The murmur in the crowd grew into a roar. Chairs scraped against the floor as shareholders stood up, squinting at the screen. Phones were already out, recording the meltdown. "Turn it off," Julian screamed, abandoning all pretense of composure. He waved frantically at the control booth. "Cut the feed, cut it now." But the screen did not change. The slideshow continued to cycle, showing hotel receipts, jewelry purchases, and emails mocking the board of directors. The malware I had embedded in the presentation system had locked the terminal. Nothing could stop the loop except pulling the power cord from the wall, and nobody in the booth was moving to do that. "You can't stop it, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "The truth has a nasty habit of coming out, no matter how deep you try to bury it. He spun around to face me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and insanity. The king had lost his crown, and the castle was burning down around him. "If you look at the entry dated February 14th, I said, pointing the laser pointer at the massive screen behind me as if I were leading a standard quarterly review, you will see an expenditure of $50,000 labeled as Market Research for Pacific Expansion. However, the geolocation data from the company jet places the aircraft in the Maldives for a week." I clicked the remote in my hand. A photo appeared on the screen. It was not a spreadsheet. It was a high-resolution image taken from Sophia's private Instagram account, which she thought was locked. It showed her and Julian clinking champagne glasses on a white sand beach. "As you can see," I continued, my voice cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd like a scalpel, "the only market being researched was the market for overpriced cocktails." The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. The polite silence of the gala was shattered. The room became a sea of glowing screens as the investors, men and women who controlled billions of dollars in capital, pulled out their phones. They were not tweeting. They were dialing their general counsels and crisis management teams. I could hear snippets of frantic conversations rising from the tables near the stage. "Sell!" A man in a gray suit barked into his phone. "Dump the position now. All of it. I don't care about the loss limits." Julian stood frozen for a moment, his eyes darting between the screen and the panic unfolding in the room. Then, something in him snapped. The facade of the civilized CEO crumbled, revealing the desperate thug beneath. "You." Julian snarled, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. "You ungrateful little—" He lunged at me. He moved with a violence that made the front row gasp, his hands reaching for my throat. But I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply watched him come. Before he could get within 3 feet of me, 2 massive figures stepped out from the shadows of the wings. They were my private security detail, hired 3 weeks ago using the funds I had quietly liquidated from my jewelry collection. They intercepted Julian with professional efficiency, one grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back while the other shoved him hard against the podium. "Let go of me!" Julian screamed, struggling uselessly against their grip. He looked up at me, sweat pouring down his forehead, his hair wild and disheveled. "Elena, you are crazy. You are ruining everything. You are destroying us." I looked down at him, my expression devoid of any pity. I felt lighter than I had in years. "No, Julian," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone I still held. "You destroyed yourself when you thought you could trample on the person who made you. Did you really think I was just a housewife? I built this company's financial infrastructure. I know where every single skeleton is buried because I am the one who dug the graves." Sophia, seeing her golden ticket turning into a prison sentence, tried to make a run for it. She hiked up her dress and scrambled toward the stage stairs, kicking off her heels to run faster. But as she reached the bottom step, the side doors of the ballroom burst open. A dozen photographers and reporters, whom I had anonymously tipped off about a massive breaking scandal 2 hours ago, flooded the room. They surrounded Sophia instantly, a wall of flashing cameras and shouting voices. She covered her face with her hands, trembling, trapped like a rat in a cage. "Just one more thing before I go," I said, drawing the attention back to the stage. I clicked the remote one last time. A map of the city appeared. "The Liberty Heights Project," I announced. "The crown jewel of the upcoming IPO. Julian claims it is prime commercial real estate worth $200 million. In reality, it is a designated wetland zone. The building permits are forgeries. The land is legally worthless." A collective groan went through the room. That was the death blow. Phones buzzed incessantly. On the news ticker visible on a tablet in the front row, I saw the headline flash: "Thorn Enterprises stock plummets in after-hours trading." The graph showed a vertical red line dropping straight down. Then came the heavy sound of the main double doors slamming open against the walls. "Federal agents!" A voice boomed. a team of FBI agents in blue windbreakers, accompanied by NYPD officers, swarmed into the room. They moved with a purpose that silenced the crowd. I had sent the full dossier, 3 gigabytes of incriminating evidence, to the district attorney's office exactly 3 hours before the gala began. I placed the microphone gently on the podium. My work here was done. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping around Julian's wrists echoed through the ballroom, louder than any applause he had ever received. The man who had stood on that podium 10 minutes ago as a titan of industry was now hunched over, his expensive tuxedo jacket bunching up awkwardly as a federal agent pushed his face against the polished wood of the lectern. "You are making a mistake," Julian screamed, spit flying from his mouth as he struggled against the agent's grip. "I am Julian Thorne. You work for the government. I pay your salary." When the agent tightened the cuffs, Julian's facade of power evaporated instantly, revealing the spineless creature beneath. He twisted his head, his eyes scanning the room frantically until they landed on Sophia, who was being corralled by 2 officers near the stage exit. "It was her," Julian yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "She is the CFO. She handles the finances." "Not me. I am just the visionary. I had no idea what she was doing with the books. She seduced me. She manipulated me into signing those things." Sophia stopped struggling. She looked at Julian, her eyes widening in disbelief. The woman who had looked so smug an hour ago now looked like a shattered doll. She let out a guttural scream that made the hair on my arms stand up. You lying coward!" Sophia shrieked, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "You told me you loved me. You told me. You said if I didn't sign those transfers, you would frame me for the Cayman accounts. I did everything for you." The room was illuminated by 1,000 tiny flashes. Every guest, every waiter, and every member of the press had their phones raised. The live stream of Julian Thorne throwing his mistress under the bus to save his own skin was already trending on social media. I watched as the comments flooded the screen of a phone held by a woman at the nearest table. The world was watching them tear each other apart. I walked calmly toward the lead FBI agent, a tall man with a stern face who was directing his team to seize the computers. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the silver USB drive. "Agent," I said, my voice steady. "This drive contains the unredacted ledgers for the last 5 years, along with audio recordings of Mr. Thorne discussing the bribes with the city planning commissioner." The agent took the drive, looking at me with a nod of respect. "Thank you, Mrs. Thorne. We will take it from here." Julian's personal attorney, a man named Arthur who had helped draft the prenup meant to leave me penniless, rushed toward the stage. He looked at the screen still displaying the evidence, then at the agents, and finally at Julian. "Do something, Arthur," Julian pleaded, sounding like a frightened child. "Get them off me." Arthur shook his head slowly, closing his briefcase. "I can't, Julian. The evidence is overwhelming. I cannot represent you on this. You need a criminal defense team." Julian's jaw dropped as his last ally turned his back on him. I turned away from the stage and began to walk toward the exit, the crowd of socialites and business tycoons, the same people who had laughed at Julian's jokes about my incompetence, parted like the Red Sea. They did not look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with fear. They shrank back as I passed, terrified that I might know their secrets too, terrified of the woman who could bring down an empire without raising her voice. As I reached the heavy double doors, a reporter thrust a microphone into my face. "Mrs. Thorne, Mrs. Thorne. Did you know about the fraud? What is your comment?" I stopped and looked directly into the camera lens. "I have been cooperating with the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 3 months," I stated clearly. "I will continue to assist them in recovering the stolen pension funds for the employees. Furthermore, as of 9 o'clock this morning, I have filed for an uncontested divorce." 2 agents hauled Julian down the center aisle. As they dragged him past me, he locked eyes with me. His face was a mask of pure hatred, but beneath the rage, I saw the crushing weight of regret. He looked at me and realized, finally, that he had underestimated the only person who had ever truly loved him. "Elena," he rasped, his voice breaking. I did not answer. I did not look back. I pushed open the doors of the Sterling Heights and stepped out into the cool New York night air. The sirens were wailing in the distance, but for the first time in years, the silence in my head was beautiful. I took a deep breath. It tasted like exhaust fumes and rain, but to me, it tasted like freedom. For 7 days, my face was on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The headlines screamed phrases like, "The wife who knew too much" and "Thorn Empire crumbles." The fallout was catastrophic and absolute. The Securities and Exchange Commission froze Julian's personal assets within 24 hours. The stock, which had been trading at $80 a share, was now delisted, worth less than the paper it was printed on. Class action lawsuits were piling up like snowdrifts in winter, but I remained untouched. I sat in the mahogany-paneled office of my attorney, finalizing the protection of my grandmother's inheritance and the investment portfolio I had quietly severed from Julian's control 6 months ago. While Julian's world turned to ash, my financial fortress was impenetrable. But there was one final piece of business to conclude. I went to see him at the Metropolitan Detention Center. The visiting room was cold and smelled of stale bleach and despair. When the guards brought Julian in, I barely recognized him. The man who wore $3,000 suits and spent hours grooming his hair was gone. In his place sat a husk of a human being in a bright orange jumpsuit. His skin was sallow, his eyes sunken and rimmed with dark circles, and his hands shook as he sat across from me. He had aged 10 years in a single week. He looked at the divorce papers I slid across the metal table, but he did not pick up the pen. Instead, he reached out, trying to touch my hand. I pulled back sharply. "Elena, please," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. "You do not have to do this. We can fight this. I can make a deal. I just need you to testify that you made a mistake with the data. Tell them you were confused." I stared at him, marveling at the depth of his delusion. "There is no deal, Julian. Sophia is already talking to the prosecutors. She is trading your secrets for a 5-year sentence." Julian flinched at her name, but he quickly pivoted, trying to summon the charm that had once beguiled me. "Sophia means nothing to me," he said, leaning forward, his eyes wet with desperate, performative tears. "It was always you. Elena, remember our honeymoon in Tuscany. Remember how we promised to stand by each other against the world I made mistakes. I know I did, but I love you. Do not leave me here to rot." For a second, I felt a phantom ache in my chest, the ghost of the love I once held for him. But then I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of an email I had found on his server, dated 2 weeks before the gala. "I might have pitied you, Julian," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I might have even felt a shred of guilt. But then I found this." I slid the paper toward him. "It is an email to Dr. Iris at the Willow Creek Sanitarium," I continued, watching his face crumble as he recognized the document. "You were inquiring about the procedure for an involuntary commitment. You told him your wife was suffering from paranoid delusions and needed to be sedated and institutionalized for her own safety. You were going to lock me away in a madhouse so you could take power of attorney over my inheritance." Julian went silent. The tears stopped. The act dropped. He stared at the table, his mouth opening and closing. But no lies came out to save him this time. "Sign the papers, Julian," I commanded, "or I will make sure this email is read aloud at your sentencing hearing." He signed. I walked out of the prison and straight into a boardroom meeting with the CEO of Apex Capital, Julian's biggest rival. While Thorn Enterprises was dead, the underlying proprietary algorithms I had written years ago still held value. I sold my intellectual property rights and my remaining shares for a lump sum of $12 million. I did not buy a yacht. I did not buy a villa. 2 days later, I sat in a modest office space in Soho, watching a painter stencil a new name onto the glass door, the Phoenix Venture Fund. "What is our focus?" my new assistant asked me, holding a notepad. "We invest in women," I replied, looking out the window at the skyline that no longer intimidated me. "Specifically, women who have been told they are too quiet, too soft, or too inexperienced to lead. We are going to give them the weapons they need to fight back." Julian had tried to bury me, but he forgot that I was a seed. Now, it was time to grow. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long, golden rectangles across the oak floorboards. From here, 40 floors up, Central Park looked like a lush green quilt spread out in the middle of the concrete jungle. It had been exactly 1 year since the night I walked onto that stage and burned my old life to the ground. In the financial districts of New York, I was no longer whispered about as Julian's wife. I was Elena Rossi, the founder of the Phoenix Venture Fund, a woman known for her sharp instincts and ironclad integrity. I had reclaimed my name, and more importantly, I had reclaimed my narrative. Justice, as it turned out, was slow but satisfying. Julian was currently serving the first year of a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. Sophia, having turned state's witness, received a lighter sentence of 5 years, though her reputation was permanently shattered. But healing was not a linear process. There were still nights when I woke up gasping for air, my sheets damp with sweat, hearing the echo of Julian's voice telling me I was useless, crazy, or small. The trauma of psychological manipulation did not vanish just because the abuser was behind bars. It lingered like a ghost in the corners of my mind. That was why I took things slow with Leo. We met 3 months ago at an art gallery in Chelsea. He was an architect with rough hands and a gentle smile, staring intently at a modernist sculpture. He had no idea who I was or about the scandal that had dominated the tabloids. To him, I was just a woman who had an interesting perspective on structural integrity. "You see how the weight is distributed," Leo had said that first night, pointing at the sculpture. "It looks fragile, but the foundation is solid. That is the trick, making strength look effortless." We sat now on my terrace, drinking coffee. We were not talking about stock yields or quarterly projections. We were discussing the use of natural light in urban housing. "I think we could open up the atrium," Leo said, sketching on a napkin. "If we use glass instead of steel here, it changes the entire mood of the building. What do you think?" "It is beautiful," I replied, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. "But is it cost-effective for a non-profit project?" Before he could answer, my laptop on the coffee table pinged with a specific, jarring alert. It was a notification from the tracking software I had never deactivated. I opened the computer. My heart skipped a beat. Not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline. A dormant offshore account in the Isle of Man had just become active. It contained $250,000, a rainy day fund Julian had managed to hide from the initial seizure. He was trying to wire the money to a high-profile appellate lawyer known for getting white-collar criminals released on technicalities. Leo looked up, noticing the shift in my demeanor. "Elena, is everything okay?" "Just a ghost trying to rattle the chains," I murmured. I did not hesitate. I did not feel angry. I simply felt a sense of duty. I captured the transaction details, traced the IP address to a contraband smartphone inside the prison, and forwarded the entire package to the district attorney. "There," I whispered to the screen. "Stay where you belong, Julian." This was not revenge. Revenge was emotional. This was hygiene. I was cleaning up a mess to ensure it did not infect anyone else. By blocking his funds, I was ensuring he served his time, protecting society from a man who viewed people as disposable assets. I closed the laptop and looked back at Leo. He was watching me with a quiet intensity. He knew my history now. I had told him everything on our third date. I expected him to run, to be intimidated by the drama, but he had just listened, his expression softening with respect. "Was that him?" Leo asked softly. "It was," I admitted. "He was trying to move some hidden money to fund an appeal." I stopped it. Leo reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "You are incredible. You know that," Leo said, his eyes searching mine. "Most people would have crumbled. You just kept building." "I had to," I said. "I had to rebuild myself." "Well," Leo said, turning the napkin around to show me his sketch again. "Speaking of building, I have been thinking, this community center project I am designing for the Bronx. We need a financial partner, someone who understands that value is not just about profit. Would you want to work on it with me?" I looked at the sketch, then at the man who saw me as a partner, not a prop. "I would love that." I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, the shadows in my mind receded completely, chased away by the morning light. I stood on the bustling sidewalk across from the glass monolith that used to be Thorne Enterprises. The gold lettering that once spelled out my husband's name had been stripped away, replaced by the sleek silver logo of the Meridian Group. Looking at it, I expected to feel a surge of triumph or perhaps a lingering phantom pain. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing. It was just a building. It was just steel and concrete. The empire that Julian had sacrificed our marriage to build was gone, but I was still standing. I realized then that the sweetest revenge was not seeing Julian in handcuffs or watching his reputation turn to ash. Those were just consequences. The true victory was standing here, breathing the crisp autumn air, and realizing that I was happier than I had ever been in the years I spent trying to be his perfect wife. Leo proposed to me 3 months later. It did not happen at a grand gala or a Michelin star restaurant. We were at a small art gallery in Brooklyn on a rainy Tuesday, looking at a painting of a storm clearing over a harbor. "Elena," Leo said, his voice quiet and steady, "I do not have an empire to offer you, but I promise I will never make you feel small so I can feel big. I want to build a life with you, a real one." He opened a small velvet box revealing a vintage ring, simple and elegant. "Yes," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "But, Leo." "Yeah," he asked, looking a bit nervous. "We need a prenuptial agreement," I said firmly. "A fair one, to protect both of us." He did not get angry. He did not accuse me of mistrust. He simply smiled and kissed my hand. "Smart woman. That is why I love you." Our wedding was intimate, held in a garden with only 50 guests. There were no reporters, no shareholders, just people who actually loved us. But the world still watched, miles away, in the common room of a federal penitentiary. Julian sat on a plastic chair, staring at the grainy screen of a communal television. The news segment showed a brief clip of me leaving the ceremony, laughing with my head thrown back, holding Leo's hand. Witnesses said Julian did not scream or throw things. He simply lowered his head into his hands and sat there in total, crushing silence, the weight of his regret finally breaking his spine. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten on cheap stationery. "Dear Mrs. Rossi," it read, "You do not know me, but I was a junior accountant at Thorne Enterprises. When the pension fund was stolen, I thought I would lose my home. Because of your testimony and the recovery efforts you funded, I got my back pay. I just wanted to say thank you for being brave enough to speak up." That letter meant more to me than any jewelry Julian had ever bought me. It gave me a new purpose. 6 months later, I stood on a stage again. This time, it was the keynote address for the Women in Business Leadership Summit. I looked out at the sea of faces, young women with ambitious eyes, older women with stories etched into their features. I did not hide my scars. "They will tell you to sit down," I said into the microphone, my voice strong. They will tell you that you are too emotional or that you do not understand the complexities of the world. My husband told me I was a decorative object. He told me I was lucky he kept me around. I paused, making eye contact with a young woman in the front row who was wiping away a tear. Do not believe them, I continued. Your silence is their weapon. Your voice is your power. Use it. The ovation that followed was not polite applause. It was a roar of solidarity. I walked out of the conference center and found Leo waiting for me by a bench in the park. He handed me a coffee, and we walked hand in hand under the canopy of oak trees. I looked at him, then back at the skyline of the city that had once threatened to swallow me whole. I was no longer the mocked wife. I was no longer the victim. Julian had once laughed at me, calling me useless. He thought he was the master of the universe. But in the end, he was just a ruin of his own making, a cautionary tale rotting in a cell. And me. Julian used to say I was nothing, I said to Leo as we walked into the sunlight. But he was the rubble, and I am the architect of my own life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.